Okay.
Hello, and thank you for joining us today for our live Q&A session with your Sonlight Advisors. I currently have Debbie with me, and Marcy is on her way. So you should be seeing her soon. But right now, Debbie and I are going to get started since we know some of you are already joining us. If you are not familiar with our Sonlight Advisors, they are available to help answer any homeschool question you might have. They are incredibly experienced, both with homeschooling and homeschooling with Sonlight. So I'm going to turn it over to Debbie for a quick introduction, and hopefully that'll give us some more time for Marcy to join us. Go ahead, Debbie, tell us a little bit more about you.
My name is Debbie. I have worked with Sonlight in various forms for 22 years. I used Sonlight for 19 years with my own 4 kids who have all graduated college at this point. They all graduated high school using Sonlight. And I love helping moms. That's what I do. So I tell people that my homeschool is messy. Life is messy. And anybody who tells you that homeschool is simple, easy, and all those like perfect social media posts, it's not. And if you need to talk messy, just let me know because I got them. I got the stories.
Well, that is a great point. Yeah, and thank you for being here. I am Sunny. I'm Sonlight's community manager. I've also been a Sonlight mom of 2 children for over a decade. I was actually a Sonlight student myself back in middle school, so we're a second-generation Sonlight family. And if you have any questions today, we are doing this live so that you can post those in the comments, and then we will answer them as we get to them. So whether you are just in that considering homeschooling stage, or you know you're going to start this year for the first time, or maybe you've been doing it 20 plus years and are looking for a little encouragement or options for handling situations you're coming up to now, we would love to help you out. So let's see, let's go ahead. It looks like I've also got Jonna and Judy joining us in the chat. So if we do not get to your questions, they are going to be helping us out as well. But Debbie, since we don't have Marcy here yet, I'm going to ask you the questions and we'll go from there. For somebody that's new to homeschooling, either they're considering it or they're still trying to figure it out for this first year, where do they begin and what types of things should they take into consideration?
Well, that's a lot. It can be overwhelming. I would say start by considering what you want your homeschool to look like. Sonlight's a literature-based curriculum, so if you've already decided that that's the type of learning you'd like, our website has tons of information. I know that can be a little much sometimes, but the resources tab has great articles to get you started, and advisors are here to help. But when I started homeschooling, I just needed to learn everything I possibly could about what the laws were in my state and what I wanted, what type of curriculum I wanted. I didn't even know how to answer those questions. But reading about different curriculum options helped me to pin down what I wanted to do. People ask me about math all the time, and I'm like, well, read about math, because when you start reading about math, you go, oh, I like that, or no, I don't like that. And it's the same with Sonlight. If you start reading about Sonlight and it says, oh, we don't have tests, you can go, oh, that makes sense, or no, it doesn't. So I don't know. The best thing to do is just start reading, start researching, recognize that every time you ask somebody information, you're going to get different answers, but just keep sorting. It's tough at first, but it does get easier.
Very true. Marcy, I don't know if you heard the first part of that while you were trying to get on. I was asking Debbie, for somebody that is new to homeschooling or they're in that consideration phase of, can I do this? Should I do this? What are some of the things they should consider, or where should they start out at?
The way I started was determining what I wanted my homeschool to look like. So there's so many different methods out there. I did a lot of reading on the different methods, and then I looked for curriculum that fit that, that process. So I wanted to do something more classical, and Sonlight was a good fit. So I think understanding what you want it to look like is a good first step, and then building around that.
That is great advice. How does that differ maybe for somebody who's pulling a child out of school versus somebody starting at the beginning with like a preschooler or a kindergartner? Are there any other things they should be aware of or considering if their child has already attended school?
I would say, and this actually goes for either option, also contact your state homeschooling organization, because they'll be able to tell you better than any neighbor, any homeschooling group, they'll be able to tell you what is required. If you're pulling a student out of school, they'll be able to tell you, this is how that works. This is what you need to do. This is what you don't need to do. I've talked to so many homeschoolers in my own state who really don't understand what's needed in reality versus what they've heard. So your state organization is a great place to go to say, what do I really need to do at this point? Whether you're just starting with a brand new pre-K or whether you're pulling a student out after 2nd grade or 12th grade, or excuse me, I guess after 11th. So, what do you need to do? And I think that's really a great place to start, is what's required.
Mm-hmm. And Sonlight's provided you with some placement tests. So that's your next step. If you have a child up through grade 4, you're going to want to do the math and language arts and reading placement tests so that we can get you in the right level. And keep in mind, that's just the level in Sonlight sequence. So it might not be what you expect, and that's okay, because your kids are coming from a different curriculum and from a different sequence of material. So they might not always reflect where you think your child is. But don't panic about that, because it's a different sequence. And also, seriously, with Sonlight, you can just get started right away, open and go. So as soon as you get your instructor's guide, you can get started and you're not wasting a lot of time.
Yeah, that is so true. That's one of the things I found most appealing, is that I did not want to reinvent the wheel. I did not want to create my own curriculum. I knew I loved to read. And so when I started, it was very important that I did something I enjoyed, so that it wasn't horrible for me as the homeschool teacher. You guys have already talked about some of the advantages to Sonlight, but what are more of the reasons that Sonlight is such a great curriculum? And for somebody who doesn't really know what their homeschool style is, what are some of the benefits of Sonlight that they might appreciate or enjoy?
Go ahead, Marcy.
Oh, go ahead. Well, when I started homeschooling, the IT was the number one thing for me, because I was not a teacher by education, and I was very overwhelmed and unsure of where to start and what to do. And, simple things like how much is too much and how much is too little in a day. I had no idea. So that was a huge consideration for me, because I felt like Sonlight provided me with those guardrails. So the instructor's guide was a big thing. Yeah, what was the other part of the question?
So just some of the benefits to Sonlight, the Sonlight method and way of teaching for people that maybe don't know what they're looking for exactly.
Okay, and I have a great answer for the second part too. So the thing about Sonlight, it's literature-based. So for a lot of people, it's really different, especially if you're coming from, the public education system, and it can seem a little bit frightening because it's so different. But the great thing about it is the conversations that you have. My kids are adults now, but I think that relationship that we built, has carried into adulthood, because we had all that time to talk to each other, and I had all that time to use the tools Sonlight gave me to instill my values in them. So those are some of the benefits to literature-based education for me. And don't worry about it not looking the same as everybody else's, because my kids did really well academically. They learned how to think.
Yeah, I agree that the instructor's guide is probably the big thing for Sonlight. I had a mom just recently ask me, well, what if I didn't get the guide? And I said, then you have a pile of books and you get to design your own curriculum. Because this instructor's guide is really what makes Sonlight Sonlight. We take books and we schedule them for you and organize them for you and give you notes and questions. And when I started homeschooling, I had 2 really basic needs. I really wasn't a heavy thinker about it. I wanted it literature-based because I thought reading stories would be more fun, but I wanted it done for me because I didn't want to do it. And Sonlight really fit those. So we stuck with Sonlight for a lot of reasons, but that instructor's guide and having it all planned out, that's really what makes Sonlight Sonlight. But I agree with Marcy with the whole, just the relationship with our kids and spending time with them. We studied together all those years. And I know everything about history only from homeschooling my children, not from going to school myself. So, you get to learn right along with them and experience things from a different point of view and watch them grow and blossom. And it's wonderful, even when it's messy.
Yeah, exactly. And I love the point that you made about you learn along with them. So you don't need to come in as the homeschool
Right.
parent knowing everything for preschool through senior year of high school, because you will learn that along with them. We have a question from Ashley. She is asking, she says she will have a first and a second grader this year. Oops, it's scrolling away. Let's see. Can you explain a little bit about how the readers fit into the Hbl course? So before you guys answer that, for anyone new to Sonlight terminology,
Did we just lose her?
Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Oh, perfect. We lost you for a minute, Sunny.
Oh, no. I'm not sure if you heard the question this year, and she is asking for a little bit about how the readers fit into the Hbl course.
Okay. In the early grades, they don't necessarily tie into anything because those are the learning to read years. And so we want to give you the chance to customize that for your kiddo's reading level. Once you start History Bible Lit D, which is Intro to American History 1, the readers will start to support that history content. So your kiddos are experiencing that time period in history through their readers. But that doesn't start until then.
I was going to say, that pretty much sums it up. When you're in those young levels, use the reading assessments. There's multiple reading options for each history level because kids are at different levels. And they're really just there for building reading fluency and comprehension and don't relate to the history topic. So, and if you have questions, I mean, obviously we can help you figure out what level you're looking for.
Yes, absolutely. I know it's a common question, but if a child is testing one level for their readers and a different level for their language arts, what do they do in those situations?
We recommend that you match your readers and your language arts. So it's actually really typical for a student who, especially if they're an advanced reader, to test more at a grade level for language arts. So in talking with an advisor, you can, get some ideas, but usually we would recommend that you choose the language arts that matches, or choose the readers that match your language arts in that case, and then supplement reading if the reading is simple. Depending upon the student, it may also be possible to do it the other way around because Sonlight Language Arts is built the way it is and not a grade level. But really, we usually suggest that you match it one way or the other, and we can work with you to get the specifics of what that might look like for you.
Perfect. Yeah. And like you guys said, if somebody is really struggling to figure out what to do for their own children, definitely reach out to our Sonlight Advisors to get that custom plan for your family. We have another question from Emily. She is saying, I'm a preschool teacher and I know I like active learning and learning through real life. Is this for us? Meaning Sonlight, I assume.
Good.
Well, the new preschool is kind of Montessori influence. So yeah, I think in the preschool levels, it certainly fits that bill. And then you have options of adding hands-on kits going forward. So you'll probably always have a hands-on option.
And Sonlight's really flexible so that if you want to add a craft or make a recipe or go someplace, it's super easy to do that without your curriculum falling apart. It won't fall apart. But also, I mean, Sonlight really prefers that less formal approach in the beginning. That's why the preschool package, for example, is only 3 days a week and has those Montessori activities. So really, we want to save that more formal learning for later on. Even in elementary years, you're looking at only a few hours a day for school. So you have lots of time for play, lots of time for those other things that you want to do, or just natural learning opportunities.
That is so true. Yeah. And I know for my family, I have a very creative, hands-on learner, and I do not learn that way, but I love the Sonlight hands-on kits for those types of things. Can you guys explain those a little further, what all is included and how we use those to make life easy for us non-craftsy parents?
I am not the crafty mom. It didn't happen at my house. But basically, those hands-on kits give you projects to do throughout the year. It's not even one every week, so don't be overwhelmed if you're not the crafty mom. There's complete instructions, there's materials, and we even tell you, we suggest when to do each project. So you can get that out and go, yeah, not this week, or you can get that and go, yes, let's do it now. But that's going to coordinate with and supplement and complement your history studies, all scheduled for you if you want that schedule, and all put together for you. And I don't want to have to go buy an entire bag of pom-poms if I don't need an entire bag of little pom-poms. So I love that we just include what you need, and it makes it simple. And these kits came into existence long after my children were young enough for them, but my kids would have loved them. And I would have enjoyed them because I didn't have to put it together and figure it out.
Yeah, I really love how they have like each individual craft is individually packaged with the instructions. Makes it super easy to use.
Yeah.
Yeah, and super easy to take. You can just bring that day's project. Mm-hmm. And, every week or so in our house. Emily is asking if we can tell how religion is incorporated into our programs, or is it not? Can you guys explain how it's incorporated in our history Bible literature, and then how that relates to like language arts and science? And do you have to do all the subjects, some of the subjects? What are some of the options you can do that way?
Barcy's looking at me. The Bible, there's a Bible portion in the history Bible literature. So every day you're going to have, in the early levels, it's reading usually from a story Bible. And then as you get into the slightly older levels, it's daily scripture reading. There's daily memory verses. And you can use those however you want. We don't tell you what you should think or feel about those scripture readings or anything. You're just reading and enjoying and helping your kids become familiar with the Bible and scripture. As you get older, there are other books included in the curriculum as well that you can use. Eventually, we move into kids doing their own scripture reading and eventually their own studying. But throughout the curriculum, even in the history or maybe even the science, there'll be notes and questions that say, hey, this character, for example, got baptized. And I'm not looking at an example, and then we'll say, hey, talk to your kids about what you believe about baptism or not. You get to decide whether you want to discuss that. We'll point out things that you can talk to your kids about as it comes up, as it's appropriate. If it's a missionary story, there'll obviously be a little more notes about that. But it's integrated into the curriculum in the notes and the questions so that you can use it however you want. And then there's the actual Bible portion of the curriculum.
I really like the way that it's kind of parent-led. So I like the philosophy of letting parents creating opportunities for parents to have those conversations, but we don't necessarily tell you what you should say. And I think that's super important, respecting parents' ability to transfer their own beliefs in a lot of situations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that too. Now, how are some of the ways that Sonlight helps guide those conversations, though? I think when you take on the responsibility of homeschooling your kids, sometimes there's that fear or apprehension of, I have to tell them everything, maybe topics I don't want to talk about or topics that are uncomfortable. But how does Sonlight kind of guide those and let you know maybe when it's an appropriate time to talk about those things and, give you the tools that you need to have those conversations?
I think that's in the notes. That's in the questions that you'll find for each assignment. And you can use those notes and questions however you want. At my house, we preferred organic conversations, meaning I might look at the notes to see what the topics were and see if there's anything specifically that I wanted to discuss. But I still had complete freedom to say, I don't want to talk about that. Or I'd love to talk about that. I hadn't even thought about it. So most of that's going to be in the notes and questions, and say, hey, you might want to mention this to your children, or we'll just simply define something that came up. And you always have the freedom to use it or not use it. And in my own home, we did sometimes, and other times we didn't. I can remember times where I was reading and I wanted to know what that meant, what that item was, or that cultural reference was. And I'd go to the instructor's guide and find it. My children were, sometimes less interested to hear my description, but I could decide, hey, how much do I want to talk about this? And so it really is just it's a guide. It's an outline. It's not written like an outline, but it's not a script. It's not here's what you must say, or here's what you should say. It's here's what you can say. And it really just allowed me to talk about what was interesting to me, getting a little more information when I needed it, maybe finding an answer because my kid asked a question, but also just to say, hey, that would be a great topic to talk about. And it didn't have to take a lot of time. So those notes and questions really guide that and allow you the freedom to make it your curriculum.
Mm-hmm. And I think the opposite is true too, because sometimes it'll give you guidance on how to address something that's difficult.
True.
And it might say, now is not the time to go into too much detail. So I think both is true. It's have this conversation, and sometimes you might want to wait for that conversation.
Yep.
Yeah, so we talked about the parent notes in your instructor's guide. Definitely, I always tell people, keep an eye on those, because otherwise sometimes our books might surprise you a little bit if you are paying attention to those. But how do we choose our literature? We've made it very clear that you as the parent are the primary in teaching your kids what you believe. But how do we choose our literature? Sometimes we do dive into difficult topics or things we don't shelter necessarily. So what does it take to become a Sonlight book?
Go for it.
Well, we actually have an article about that, criteria that Sarita uses. But I think one of the things that we look for is some kind of redemption for a character. So even if we have a character or a difficult topic, we look for some kind of resolution to that provides an opportunity for you to talk to your kids about something. And there are some times when we hear from parents, this book is not hard enough for this grade, or this book is too easy for this grade. And I always tell them that's because we choose them for content. We're not necessarily always trying to challenge their reading level. Sometimes we're trying to communicate something to them instead. So it's good to kind of keep that in mind too. But yeah, I don't know, Sunny, do you have that blog post?
Yeah, let me pull that up, and I will try to drop that in the comments so that people can see it.
Yeah, there's a really great article, but I agree with Marcy that really it's about what books or stories communicate the information that we want to communicate at the time. And it, like Marcy said, it's really not about, is this a hard book or an easy book? It's more about, what can we talk to our kids about? What do we want to tell them? Because young kids can hear something from a difficult book, maybe not, the idea is not that they understand every single detail. Older kids can read something or hear something from a much younger book and learn from it. I mean, I can't tell you how much I learned from my child's second grade history program. So I think that's a big thing. And then, like Marcy said, the redemption is even in those books that have that rough character or that odd instance, how was it resolved? What was the resolution? Was it well done? And then so it'd be characters and stories and issues that we want our kids to either be familiar with or learn from, even in the just how did that character handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. Jonna or Judy, I'm going to throw that to you guys. If you can find that article and drop it in the comments for us. I've got a lot going on, so I want to make sure I can stay focused on the conversation at hand. But a lot of times people will say, okay, you have these great books. Can I get by with just a book list and maybe the IG? What is the advantage, would you ladies say, to actually buying and owning your Sonlight curriculum as opposed to trying to check out books from the library?
There are a couple downsides to not. I'll take it first, Deb, and then you can have it. There's a couple downsides to getting it, sourcing from the library or sourcing from somewhere else. The one downside that I found where I live is that there are so many Sonlighters that you could never get those books from the library. Somebody always had them on hold because we're all doing them at the same time. So there's no guarantee that even if your library has the book, it's going to have it available when you need it. Because the books are scheduled for you, everybody's doing them around the same time. The other is that we schedule by page number. So different editions of the same book are not always exactly the same. And so that can cause some difficulty for you because you won't know where you're supposed to read for that day.
And we also found that I just preferred having them on my shelf. I had 4 kids, so at one point they were all young. Getting to the library today wasn't necessarily going to happen. And so I preferred just having them so that I didn't have to make sure I got to the library. Even if the library had exactly the copy of the exact book I wanted, I didn't have to get there to get it. And there was just a simplicity to having the books, knowing that they were the right books. But the other option is, or the other issue is that if you do get a book from the library or from somewhere else, we can't necessarily answer questions about that book. So if you're having a trouble with it matching your schedule or something about the book, if we don't know what you have and you didn't get it from Sonlight, we're not as able to answer questions. So the other advantage of having the books from Sonlight is that we can help you with your curriculum much easier and much better.
Right. And if you have more than one child, you just put it in a box and you take it out for the next kiddo. So it eliminates a lot of that, I have to go buy something for this child thing that happens every year in a curriculum that's more based in worksheets and things like that, because you've already got everything you need. Replace your language arts and your science worksheets and you're good to go. So that's another benefit of that, is that it's all there for you for the next kiddo.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mine are 5 years apart, so they're never doing the same program at the same time. And it is great that I've already got everything I need for my second child. Also, another point that we have noticed in our home is that if we leave the books out, the kids like to come back and revisit those books. Even if the program is 2 or 3 years ahead of them, they might now be at a reading level where they can read the books that you read out loud to them or things like that. So yeah, I love having all the books and out all the time. Let's talk about organizing though. Marcy, you mentioned storing things away for your next child. I like to keep mine out on the shelves. How, especially if you do Sonlight for a while, you end up with a lot of books. So what are some ways to store those and keep those in good shape for the next child or next children?
It's such a personal thing. I think everybody's mind works differently in terms of how best to store things. I think, seriously, do it the way that makes sense to you. The way that I did it was in identical plastic tubs labeled with the level, and then I could just pull it out. I didn't prefer to have my books out because I wanted them to be fresh for the next child that was using them. But we did when they were done. My kids are grown-ups now, and when they were done, we had this great library. And now the books are out, and I'm even buying extra copies of old favorites for them to put in their libraries now that they're adults. So, you just have to find the way that works for you. I don't know how you did it, Debbie.
I kept them on bookshelves. But somehow my kids always knew which shelves they could get into and which shelves they couldn't. So I did have all mine out and I had older kids who went back and reread younger levels all the time. Sometimes my bookshelves were in the basement, so not always as easily as accessible as others. It just depended. I always had the current year right where we were using it, and my others were usually stored somewhere else, but we did have access to them. I just didn't have room for tubs, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, there are plenty of ways. I know we've had people that store them in dressers. Yeah. In those big totes in the garage. I mean, really whatever is going to work best for you. We have a comment from Katie in the comments saying that her library is really small. And so they didn't have half of the titles in her current HBL. I know I've seen that as well. So if you're still thinking like, oh, I don't know if I need to buy it, that is the case for me as well, that our library did not have most of our Sonlight books. Let's see, we have a comment from Christy who said some of her sons read some of their books 5 or more times, which is great for fluency. So Yes, I actually recommend don't get rid of your books for a long time either because of that. I still have my preschool books and my youngest will be in 3rd grade in the fall. So yeah, still love to keep those books. Let's see, Ashley is asking, do you recommend starting with Level K Hbl since it's our first year with Sonlight and she has 1st and 2nd graders, or should she go ahead and start with Level A? So I know we've talked about assessments. We haven't really talked about how do you pick your Hbl? Those are designed for a wide variety of ages. So how do people decide which level they're going to choose for that?
I would say that honestly, either one. If you've got a 1st and a 2nd grader, you want to choose something that's age appropriate for both. And Level K, which is age appropriate for ages 5 to 7, would indeed be appropriate. So would Level A, which is for ages 6 to 8. But don't feel like you have to do K before you do A. You're not missing something. There are more levels of Sonlight than there are levels of school. So at some point you will have to pick and choose. If you don't use levels K and you decide to start with A, you will see American history again in mid to late elementary levels. So you're not going to miss something entirely. We're not teaching something at the kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade level that we're expecting kids to remember for the rest of their lives. So either one, pick something that looks interesting to you, pick something that is age appropriate for your kids. And if you've got 2 levels to choose from, great, but there's not a wrong answer there.
Right. And I think there's some confusion sometimes with people when they see those grade ranges that they're holding a child back in some way because they're doing something with a younger sibling. And I like to tell people to look at those ranges as an indicator of maturity and age appropriateness rather than skill level, because we're going to address the skills with other subjects. But you really just want to make sure it's age appropriate.
Right.
That's such a great point. We have someone asking, she is going to do HBLA with 3rd grade readers for her 2nd and 3rd graders this fall. She's asking if the readers go with the HBL you're on. So if she does B next year, will the grade 3 readers be different books? Can you guys explain what she should do and if that's true or not?
No, it's not. Well, I guess I don't know whether that's a yes or no question. So your readers will be different for every grade level. So if you do History B with grade level 3 readers, those student readers are going to be different than the ones you did last year. So each level of readers is unique. Is that the question?
So the way I'm reading it, I don't actually know. I'm reading it. She's asking if she does A with grade 3 readers this year and then does B with grade 3 readers next year. Are those grade 3 readers the same books or different books?
Oh, yes, they are.
So you'd move up to the grade 4 readers when you move up to Level B.
Right. So don't order grade 3 readers twice.
Correct.
There, right. Oh, yeah. Okay.
Right. Grade 1 readers are grade 1 readers no matter what history you read them with. Grade 3 readers are grade 3 readers no matter what history. So yes, you don't want to do grade 3 readers with Level A and then also do them with Level B.
Right. Right. Yeah. And theoretically, your child would be moving up to the next level. But again, if you're not sure, talk to the advisors, do those assessments. Maybe one child is at a different level because it looks like she's doing it with 2 kids. So that may become the case as well. Once you're in Level D, though, those readers are part of the same HBL, correct? There's just one set of readers at that point.
Right. Well, and if she's doing A with both a 2nd and a 3rd grader, you might have 2 different levels of readers. In which case, if you have a 2nd grader reading a grade 2 readers in A and a 3rd grader reading grade 3 readers in A, the 2nd grader will move up and do grade 3 readers in B. But now that's getting complicated. But when I say it, but the reader levels are unique, and therefore they're not. You don't want to repeat a level usually with the same student.
Perfect. Well, thank you. Okay, so let's talk now we've talked about the books themselves. We've talked a little bit about the instructor's guide. That can be very intimidating the first time you get it. I know we have a video online about how to assemble it, or that's something you can have Sonlight do for you. But if you have more than one child, I just have one of my IGs here so that people that aren't familiar can see how big these are. What's a way or ways to make that easier to teach where you don't have to lug the big binders out to your table every day, or how do you figure that out with more than one kid?
I think everybody does it differently. I liked to get a small 1-inch binder, and I took 3 weeks of each of my different instructor guides and put them in my small binder. That small binder lived with us on the table where we did a lot of our work. It could go outside or go to the couch, and I didn't have to lug the big binder around. However you do it, the goal is to know where your materials are. So if you like to just pull, 1 or 2 sheets a day and do it that way, you always know what's in the big binder with your multiple instructor guides. But I like to pull them out just a few weeks at a time. And I had 2 or 3 levels going at a time, and I would literally pull out 2 or 3 weeks of each level and put them in my small binder so I wasn't overwhelmed. Every year I would get overwhelmed. Even after 10 years in, I would look at that stack of papers and go, no way.
So, and my brain works differently. I recreated the wheel, I think, every year. So my kids really enjoyed buying a planner every year because, they didn't get to buy a lot of school supplies like their public school peers. So they would pick out a planner, and then I would put their assignments for the day in a planner for each of them every day. And the binder I had a table that was dedicated to my binder, and it just stayed open to that week for my use. And as my kids got older, they used those binders to do some of their independent work on their own because they had a list. So I guess it depends on how your brain works.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point that you can change it from year to year. So what might work when your kids are young and you're doing all of the management of their schoolwork as opposed to when they're older and more independent, that may change. I know I do it slightly differently with both of my kids. So yeah, definitely something to try with. The smaller binder does make it easier to carry around. So if that's important to you, you might want to do that. If you're always doing school at home, though, it's easy to leave it in the big binder too. So you mentioned school supplies and not having the same amount of school supplies that a child going to school does. I know when you go to school, you get that list from the teacher at the beginning of the year as far as here's what you need. But what do you really need if you're homeschooling and not going to school as far as school supplies go?
Just the typical things: pencil, paper. You might want to have like scissors and glue around. I like to have sticky notes because, it's a good way to mark your place in the book or keep a note. But it's really minimal.
Yes, I agree. And I actually have my school supplies here because my desk becomes our dumping ground. But we just keep it in this little lazy Susan for both kids. And you can see I have like markers, crayons, pencils, a ruler, just very basic things. I usually say, start small with pencils, and then you may find that you need more later on. Welcome back, Debbie. We had a little bit of connectivity. We were talking about school supplies. Is there anything that you absolutely have to have when you homeschool, or, you don't have a school supply list like you do with public schools? So what do you do?
I just had pencils and paper. We really didn't do much special at all. I usually let my kids get a box of crayons or whatever they wanted, but we didn't do much particular for school supplies. It was sort of an all-year thing.
And wait till they go on clearance, because you don't need them when school starts. About a week after school starts, they're going to be so cheap. So wait.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Great point. Okay, so I have a question from Diana. She says, we are doing HBLC. Eldest will be in 4th grade readers, and second child will be having 3rd grade levels. However, I am planning to use Language Arts 2 and Language Arts 3 for my 3rd grader, and Language Arts 3 and Language Arts 4 for my grade 4. Will that be too much?
It could be. That's a lot of language arts. I think the main goal will be to make sure that your younger student or both students have at least finished the grade 3 readers and Language Arts 3 before you move on to level D like David. Sonlight Language Arts teaches those important topics year after year after year. And if you're using both Language Arts 2 for one child and Language Arts 3 for another, you will often find, even sometimes in the same week, oh, look, an exercise to write a description. So there's so many topics that come up every year. It may not be necessary to do Language Arts 2 and Language Arts 3 with the same student. If that student's reading the grade 3 readers, just try Language Arts 3, see what happens. Can you do 2 levels of Language Arts in a year? Yes, you can, but you're talking about doubling up on Language Arts every day, and I think it would be a lot for most families.
Yeah, I would not enjoy teaching 2 levels, well, 4 levels in this case to
4
2.
levels.
So yeah, so that's something to think about too. Like you guys said, you really only have to do 1 level. You did mention that you could though, if they finished 1 level. I know our IGs are written for 36 weeks, unless we're talking preschool. What if you find that your child is moving really fast or slower than assigned? Are you able to modify that in a given school year, or do you have to do all 36 weeks in a year and then stop there?
I think a lot of people find that they can stretch that. I know there's quite a few people that use a Sonlight History Bible lit over more than 1 year. So I wouldn't be afraid to do that. And the beauty of homeschooling is that you can tailor the education to your child's needs. And I don't think you should be afraid to do that. You are the best judge of what's right for your child. And, if something's not working, it's okay to stop and, kind of take stock of where you're at and make a plan to accomplish what needs to be accomplished. If your child's having trouble reading and it's going slow, that's okay. Let it go slow because you're building a foundation. And if you rush through it, you're just going to create, frustration later. And I think in terms of the language arts, just kind of circling back there real quick, the other thing I hear a lot from people is they're afraid if they don't get all the levels in, they're going to miss something. So sometimes that's why they want to do more than 1 in a year, and just know that it's spiral. So it's coming back. It's not gone for good. If you didn't get all the years in, that's okay. You're going to be okay.
Right. And if you did want to do the 2 levels in a year, like I said, I think it would be a lot because you'd be doubling up. But I think if you've never used Sonlight Language Arts, it'll make more sense once you get into it. It's not, can you go faster through a level? Yes, you could. Is it beneficial to? Not necessarily, because that's your chance to expect a student to dig in a little bit more or to write even more maturely this time. It's really not about, because they're not grade level language arts, it's not about finishing it faster. It's about doing it well. It's about adding to what you already know and building those skills. So it's not like a math program where, oh, we understand lesson 1, we can move on to lesson 2, and we could do 3 lessons in a day because this is all review. That's not really the way our language arts works. So I think once you get more used to it, it's easier to understand why, it's not like we're going to move through this faster, even if my student's more able. It's just not the way our Sonlight Language Arts is set up. And that's a little bit odd compared to some other programs, but it's also the beauty of it.
Mm-hmm. There's another situation too with that speeding up thing. Because we like to have the readers and language arts match in the lower grades, sometimes you choose a language arts that's a little below the reading just to make sure you're not missing something. So it's okay to go through the parts that are review for you more quickly if that's how it works. And then when you're ready, advance to the next level.
Yeah, and I know from personal experience, I thought, when my kids were like kindergarten age, I had the 10-year plan of how it was all going to work out. And of course, as that time has gone on, I've seen how they learn differently. And sometimes one child's ready to move on when another one isn't. So yeah, take it year by year. That's kind of my personal advice on that, and see where your kids are. I know next year I plan to slow down a little bit with my son because I don't think he's quite ready to do the full level in the year. And so we'll be breaking that down a little slower and doing it over 1.5 years. So don't feel, like you guys said, it's not a grade level. You don't have to finish it because this is 3rd grade or this is 4th grade. It's a wide range, and it's learning those skills and developing, those skills that the kids are going to need to then move on to more difficult things. But what about if you think something's not working? At what point do you switch it up or supplement, especially like in language arts, there's so many pieces involved in that: spelling, vocabulary, writing skills, all of that. When do you decide, okay, I need to switch up this curriculum, or I need to add to it? Or can I wait and see? My child's not reading. What do I need to be concerned about? Or when should I be concerned? How do you figure those things out and kind of troubleshoot it?
I think that kind of depends on the exact situation. And that's actually a great time to call an advisor and just kick around some ideas. Sometimes it's time to cut bait. Other times it's you didn't even realize there was a different way of doing it. I've talked to parents who are like, oh, I didn't know that's the way I should be doing it. And so all that, it's just a little tweak. So I think it really depends on the parent, the student, and the exact situation as to what that might look like. Yep, sometimes you need a different level, higher or lower. Sometimes you just need to make a change in your expectations. Sometimes you need to maybe change up the way you're actually doing an assignment, or a type of assignment. And so really it's about the specifics of the situation, I think, more than there's not one general answer. It sort of depends.
Right. You need to have some flexibility. And even two children in the same family can be completely different. So a math that worked for your older child might not work for your younger child, or your younger child might not read as quickly as your older child. And sometimes we think that, if they're not keeping up, then they're doing it wrong or they're not getting it. And that's not necessarily true. Sometimes you just have to take a step back and think, evaluate how things are going and call an advisor. Yeah. And talk it over.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are available to answer those questions, troubleshoot, reassure, all of the things. I think sometimes people don't think about that till they're having an emergency or they're making their purchases for the following year. But yeah, that's absolutely something you guys can discuss. We have a comment from Katie saying that her son and daughter use the same language arts, even though they were in different levels, but she expected her daughter to write more advanced, and she was able to have age level work for each child within the same level. So that's something too, if your kids are close in age or you're combining a program, you might be able to do that and just expect more out of the more advanced child. So that's a great idea. Thank you, Katie, for that suggestion as well. Now let's talk about, I know schools and everything going on in schools has changed a lot in the last few years with virtual learning and all of that. And some people are realizing that school isn't working for their kids and they never expected to even consider homeschooling. But if school isn't working, how do you know that you as the parent are going to be able to teach this child any better?
Well, what we tell parents, I know Debbie will agree with this, we frequently tell people, you are your child's original teacher. How did you teach them to walk and talk and do all the things that you taught them? It just came naturally. And that can extend into your homeschooling journey. You don't have to be a professional teacher. You don't have to know everything. You just have to kind of springboard off what you know about your kiddos.
Right. And you've been teaching your child for 4 years, 5 years, or however long before they go to school, and you continue teaching them. And there's no special magic about sending them to school and having a teacher who's been trained to be a teacher. So I really think we need to learn as parents to trust ourselves. I know that's hard for some of us. It is for me sometimes. Or just to, understand that we can do this and feel like we're not going to ruin our kids. And I can tell you with pretty much 100% surety, you can't ruin them. But, and again, this is where having a homeschooling group or other moms that you can kind of talk to and go, how does this work? Is this, what is going on? Just hear that everybody else is also trying to figure out the same thing, or call an advisor. We're here to tell you our stories. So honestly, trust yourself and trust the talents and the fact that God gave you that child. He didn't give you that child as only mommy or daddy. You're his teacher, whether it's walking and talking or zipping a jacket or how to read.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you guys said there. And then also remember, as the parent, you love this child more than any teacher ever could. So I think you're going to go deeper to try to help them maybe than if they're one of many in a classroom. And also, like I said earlier, I take it from year to year. I would never claim to be an expert now, even after many years of this, because it does change. Your kids change, but you know your kids. And so if you have that love and that desire to teach them, it isn't as challenging as you might think. Also, here at Sonlight, we do pray for our families every single day. So if you have a prayer request, you can always send that to us and we will pray for your situation specifically and encourage you however you most need it. Let's talk a bit about the school schedule, though, whether your kid's been in school or not. I think sometimes the hardest thing for homeschool families to wrap their mind around when they start this is that it doesn't look like a typical school schedule. So what are some ideas as far as like scheduling school in a way that makes sense for your family, figuring out, does a loop schedule work for you guys? Do you have to do school at 8:30 a.m.? You know, what about when your kids are wiggly? All those different things that are an advantage that homeschooling offers you.
I liked the flexibility of being able to school year round. We sort of fell into that accidentally. The very second year that we were homeschooling, I was getting ready to have a baby, and I was like, we need to get started because I don't know what's going to happen when she comes the first week of September. And so we got started early. Well, nothing happened when she came. We just kept going, and we loved it, and we were done fairly early in the year. And so the next year I was like, hey, we're doing that again. And so we used to start in the summer when it was hot and when the tourists were around, and we would school hard. My kids were young enough not to know the difference, and it worked well. It gave us the flexibility in the fall to play and camp and take time off, or to take off that whole month between Thanksgiving and New Year's. I guess that's more than a month. So we enjoyed that, even though we kind of fell into it accidentally. As my kids got older, that was harder to maintain. They had summer camps and they had summer jobs and they had whatever. But we still took advantage of that flexibility to be able to school how we wanted and when we wanted. And for us, schooling on a school year calendar, which you can do, you can line yours right up if that makes sense for you, but it never worked for us particularly. It was just too hard. I liked being able to take off because I needed to go grocery shopping.
I think in terms of a daily schedule, sometimes you have to try a couple of things. I feel like a lot of these answers that we're giving you today are, hey, try a couple of things, do what's best for your family, right? But in terms of your daily schedule, I think you just have to, I think you just have to try a couple of things. You know, if you know your children are morning people, then maybe you want to hit math first thing in the morning. We used to break it up. So I guess we didn't do school in like one block of time in the day. So we might do our read aloud during lunchtime or at bedtime or something like that to kind of split it up. So it kind of depends. It depends on your own temperament too. Sometimes, you know, you have to do it when you're fresh and when you have what you need to do it. And I know I talk to people all the time who are working full time, and they're doing it when they get home from work and on Saturdays. So, you know, you just you can do whatever you want that feels right for you. That's the beauty of it.
Yep. I always suggest that you try different things. For us, math could wait till the last thing in the day, no matter what, because we loved it. But if you need to do math first so that it gets done, do it. And if that's at 6 o'clock in the morning or 10 o'clock in the morning, just try it, see what happens.
Right. Yeah, that's so true. And I love that you mentioned working parents, because that's always a big question too. Can you do this if you're working? My husband and I actually both work remotely and homeschool the kids kind of in a tag team approach. He does science experiments. We're all night owls, so we do afternoon, evening school. I don't make my kids get up early. That's when I'm working. So like you guys said, trial and error and seeing what works. I cannot imagine trying to do morning school, but I know many Sonlight families who are done by 10:30, 11 every day. So yeah, play around with that and see how it works for you. Also, if your kids are wiggly, I love that they can get up and move around while you read to them. Let's talk to the parents, though, who maybe have been doing this a long time and they're struggling with either motivation to keep going, or maybe they're comparing themselves to other families. They're feeling burnt out. What advice or tips would you give them, you know, for maybe these later stages in the homeschool journey?
Sometimes I think you need a break. So A lot of times I will talk to people who are so stressed out about catching up that they don't ever want to take a break because they feel behind. So you get into kind of that cycle. And the first advice I give them is you need to take a break because we all need rest. We need it, the kids need it. So don't try to power through and feel that pressure to catch up if you feel that you're behind. There is no behind. It doesn't exist in homeschooling. So, make sure you're taking time to rest. Your kids need it too. And everybody's just going to be cranky if you never rest.
And also, while you're resting, maybe reassess where you're at and where you want to be. Because, like Marcy said, it's not about behind, but I do understand that, hey, I really wanted to be through this, or I really wanted to be in that spot in my curriculum. So reassess where you are and make a plan for how to get there. Maybe it's dropping a book. Maybe it's completely leaving everything and restarting it. I got to the end of a year with a high schooler, and stellar homeschool mom that I am, discovered that she really hadn't finished anywhere near what I thought she had finished. And we had to step back and regroup and decide, what do I really need to see happen this year to be confident? And what can we continue into next year? And we completely changed as a high schooler what she was studying and how I thought the 2 years were going to go. Because we just had to take it, and we didn't try to cram it all in either. We just had to go, okay, I want to make sure you read these books or that we get this covered. And also remember, elementary or high school, most classroom teachers do not get through everything in a year. They've got a curriculum and they've got a set number of school days. And if there were a lot of snow days and a bunch of assemblies, they have to either skip something or just get to as far as they can. So it's okay also as homeschool parents to say, hey, we're not going to get all this. It's week 23 and we're done. Now, whether you do week 24 next year is up to you, but you can always just drop back and regroup and say, where are we and what's next? And it doesn't have to be the next thing on the schedule.
Right. Setting goals is the big thing because your goals don't have to look like anybody else's goals. You know what you want your child, I might have had for my younger child, we are going to learn our times tables this year, right? So then I clear the decks because that's my goal. And sometimes you need to do it. Sometimes you just need to focus on a couple of goals.
Yeah, and I think that's hard, especially if you're starting out or if you have more of a type A personality. I definitely do. You want to do everything in the instructor's guide. One of you said it earlier, though, that it is a guide and it's flexible. And you both mentioned dropping things. Can you briefly touch on, though, if you do have a high schooler and you're worried about graduation credits and maybe their college application process, how do you determine what they have to do versus what would be nice to do and what you can drop for a student in that situation?
In the elementary levels, we just decided to drop books because for whatever reason. In the high school levels, it really was a matter of how much have you done and what do I really feel like you need to get done. It's your course and your transcript. So ultimately you get to decide. And for many of us, we've looked at, or I've talked to a lot of moms who have compared their language arts course or their literature course to something their public school studies. And they've discovered that their public school literature course does 6 excerpts from books, not even whole books. And they're going, we were reading 23 or whatever it was. Exactly. I'm not saying you only want to read 6 books. That's not necessarily your goal, but recognize there's a lot there. So it's hard to say what you should recommend or should expect. But if you know your student's been reading every day and you got through 10 books, maybe that is appropriate for your student and your homeschool. It's not necessarily wrong just because somebody else got through twice that many in this year. No 2 students are going to learn the same thing, whether they're in public school or private school or homeschool. There's always something to miss. So I don't know. I don't know if there's a one size fits all to how do you know. I think it's really what's important to you. I used to look at a literature level and there were a couple books that I wanted to make sure we covered. They were books I recognized or whatever. And so maybe we could do that. But otherwise, if we were struggling, I'd sit down and go, okay, I want to pick 10 books to get through this year. We've gotten through 6. Here's the rest of them. Choose from. Let's find 4 together, and maybe even include your student.
if you're worried about high school, the other thing, there's a couple other things you can do. You can check with your homeschool organization, make sure you're hitting all the things that you need to graduate your student. And I used to like to use the College Board's website of practice tests as a guide too, because they're going to tell you, you can look at those tests and ascertain what your child's going to need to know to take the SAT or ACT. And it's pretty obvious if you get the math one and you're like, wow, we need to get going. And that can help you too. If your child's planning to go to college, think back to when you were planning to go to college and you're taking your high school courses. What courses did the colleges want to see? Maybe call a college that you think you might be interested in, ask them what they're going to want to see on a transcript. So there are ways that you can find out and you don't have to guess.
Well, thank you so much, ladies, for joining me today. These insights and advice are so appreciated by me, and I know the people watching. If you are watching and didn't get a chance to ask your question, or maybe you want a more personalized plan for your students, you can still contact Marcy and Debbie and our other advisors via live chat, text, email, or phone. And all of that contact information can be found at sonlight.com/advisors. So head over there and reach out, and we would love to help you. That is something that we like to do, is share and give you tips and tricks, and these ladies are ready and waiting for you. So Marcy, Debbie, thank you so much for being here today.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys.
Nice